I'm Brandi Lawless. I am a professor at the University of San Francisco. I teach in the Department of Communication Studies. And I grew up in poverty, and I was a kid that was on free school lunch programs. So that bill was supposed to expand free school lunches. The first proposal was, let's expand it for everybody, similar to what California is doing. We can end stigma. That was declined. So then the next one was, well, let's make it so that we up the poverty level, 200% of the poverty line. How about anybody who falls within that range? And we're talking like $47,000 for a family of three. It's still quite low. And then that was rejected by one vote. And it's along party lines. And one of the senators said, this is an issue about negligent parents. It's not an issue that we should concern ourselves about. But then the following week, they voted to raise the reimbursement for their own lunches. So I guess there is such a thing as free lunch for some. The politicians who tried to ban abortion are using arguments that are under the guise of pro-life. Pro-life in the sense that you should be born, but after that, we're not essentially pro-life. So we're not going to support feeding you. We're not going to support child tax credits. We're not going to support preschool programs. We're not going to support early education at all. We're not going to support families so that they can work while children are taken care of. So essentially, once you get here, you're on your own. And I make that link because this is an opportunity to say, if you are pro-life, prove it. And they weren't able to do that. Students in general are hungry, and that means that they are not able to concentrate in class, which means that they're acting out, they're being penalized. They might receive detention, suspension, and those are the students that are disciplined, put on special learning tracks, special education. In addition to that, as a kid on the school free lunch program, I remember going up to the lunch lady and saying, I'm on the list. And people behind me would be like, what list? Maybe I'm on the list. I'm like, no, you're not on the list. Well, just tell me because I might be on the list. No, you're not on the list. If you don't know about the list, then you're not on the list. And essentially forced me to say, it's people who are poor who get free lunches. Oh, okay, I'm not on the list. So there are a lot of examples of verbal stigma, but then also those examples that prove that people are falling behind when they're hungry, when they can't concentrate. So when folks say that there's no such thing as a free lunch, it's generally coming from economics, right? And economists want to also think about investment. So if you want to say one thing is true, then we can also say that the other is true. That if there's no such thing as a free lunch and instead it's about investing money, then let's invest money in our children. So that means we can copy something like what California did. During the pandemic, California took the pandemic funds and made free lunch available to all students. They don't know who's hungry. A lot of middle-class families might still struggle even though they're above the poverty line, especially if they were out of work. So they said, let's just make it free for everybody to end food insecurity. And then when the pandemic funding ran out, California found the funds to keep that going. Now, it's not forever. Right now, the language says indefinite. And I just saw an email this morning that says it's approved for next year. But it's still on a year-to-year basis. I think that state legislatures could continue to find the money by taking from other places. Or we could do this federally and move money into social services like funding free lunch. But one thing that has been in the news recently is that some states have unspent TANF funds, temporary assistance for needy families. You might have heard about it in the news because there have been some examples of the funds being poured into tennis facilities or other sports facilities, right? And it's coming under question. Why were those funds able to move into these sports facilities instead of being used for something like feeding all children? So when we take that money that's in the state budget or the federal budget, whichever way we want to think about this, and move it toward funding everybody, then we don't have to separate out people who maybe are just on the cusp of the poverty line but are still struggling. And it's a win for everybody because you're ending the stigma when everyone says, when everyone's provided free lunch.